New York City exists because of the maritime industry. This has been a long tradition of maritime activities that actually were the founding of the city itself. Nobody knows better than my friend right here about the history of the port in New York. But in the year 1542, Giovanni de Verrazzano became the first European explorer to see what would one day be the harbor of New York. He put in his logbook, "We have found a beautiful harbor." Almost 500 years later, New York is still welcoming ships and commerce into the great harbor. This city exists because of the estuaries and the harbor that serve trade in this area. Our financial markets were based upon the burgeoning waterborne trade on our piers. As the Erie Canal opened, we became a gateway to the vast interior of the continent and brought American goods to the international market. This harbor welcomed waves of immigrants that came in search of the American dream, and from this harbor sailed the men and materiel that made the world safe for democracy. Today's port in New York and New Jersey remains one of the world's premier ports and is firmly established as a key gateway and distribution hub serving the most prosperous consumer market in the entire world. Goods enter our harbor, enter intermodal networks, and are delivered locally, regionally, and nationally. We've talked about, if you've been sitting here, you've heard all the statistics. We're the third largest container port in the United States. We're the largest petroleum product port in the United States, and we generate over 360,000 full-time job equivalents, handle over $203 billion in cargo value, over 37 million tons of bulk cargo, over 477,000 vehicles. This is a huge port. It generates jobs. It's an economic engine. Why don't people know about that? Because we've gotten so good at what we do, most people don't even know we do it. Ask someone where their clothes come from, and they'll say Walmart or Sears. It comes on a ship. Cell phones, television sets. They don't make collared shirts in the United States anymore, and I don't want anybody to raise their hand. But unless you are wearing boutique underwear, it came from overseas. We don't make underwear in the United States anymore either. So it's a key thing. Shipping now delivers the American way of life. In addition to the international trade, the estuary systems are vital transportation links with bustling domestic barge trades moving heavy bulk commodities like fuel oil, aggregate, chemicals, salt, sand, and municipal trash. In fact, our friends with the Federal Maritime Administration have designated the Hudson River as a targeted American marine highway. The current focus in this port is the looming debut of the newest classes of cellular container vessels that are emerging as the newest benchmarks of clean, efficient maritime transport. When Malcolm McLean created the container industry on April 26, 1956, right here in Newark, New Jersey, he loaded 58 containers onto the 524-foot vessel Ideal X. In the last 60 years, container vessels have become behemoths, capable of carrying over 18,000 TEU and are over 1,200 feet long, up to 190 feet wide. These ships are more efficient, more environmentally friendly, and very importantly, very big. You've heard about the investment that the port has made in deep channels, higher bridges, improved terminals, and expanded intermodal networks necessary for this port to accommodate these mega ships. But are we really ready for the ships that will usher this new age in for us? Physically, probably yes. Operationally, we're here to talk about that a little bit today. This panel will discuss that. We're fortunate to have several key leaders who will give comments pertinent to labor, local industry cooperation, ship assist capacity, terminal operations, and the ability to actually maneuver these new vessels in our deeper but more congested and narrower channels. All the presenters' bios are in the program, and in the interest of time, I hope you'll read all of their bios. But I'd like to just say we're very blessed to have with us here today Buckley McAllister, who's the president of McAllister Towing and Transportation Company, and he'll be talking about ship assist and the domestic tug and barge business. We've got Captain Bob Flannery, who is probably one of the only people in the room that actually knows if these big ships can fit into this port and what type of procedures may have to be instituted to accommodate those transits. And we've got John Nardi, President of New York Shipping Association, who'll talk to us about the status of our labor force here in the port and about our Council on Port Performance, which tells us how our industry is going to cooperate together to make all of this happen. So perhaps I'll start with John, if you would, please.
Thanks, Ed. I'm going to talk a little bit about the efforts we're making to improve the movement of freight, really a boots-on-the-ground view of activities that are going on. First, a little bit about the New York Shipping Association. We're not the Port Authority. We're a private association whose responsibility is to represent and bargain on behalf of the terminal operators and the ocean carriers that call in the port on behalf of management with the International Longshoremen's Association to create a local contract and a master contract. When we're not bargaining, our job is to administer the contract, which includes making sure we have a right-sized workforce to handle the needs of the industry. Over the past 2.5 years, we've had quite a change in the workforce. We've retired about 300 people out of the 3,000 or so that were working, and we've added over 900 workers to the workforce. As part of this collective bargaining agreement, we had agreed with the ILA that 51% of the new hires that come in would be veterans. So over that period of time, we've added over 400 veterans to the workforce. We actually received from the American Legion, in recognition of our efforts for hiring veterans, we received the Outstanding Employer Veterans Award for 2015. So these are the people that are going to be handling your freight when you bring it to New York. Administering the contract also means paying for the benefits of what we negotiate. And we do this by charging the ocean carrier members a fee per unit that we use to, for the cost of the pension and welfare and so on. Since these costs are mainly fixed in nature, the more freight we get, the lower we can make that charge per unit. This is why, in addition to achieving efficiencies through the CBA, the NYSA involve ourselves in any effort that has to do with moving freight through the port, whether that's dredging, whether it's legislation that affects the movement of freight, whether it's the raising of the Bayonne Bridge. We do whatever it takes to make sure that all of the key factors are in place so that the port can continue to grow. Because the more we grow, the more efficient it becomes. The more efficient it becomes, the more freight we get. And on the opposite side, the less freight we move, the more expensive we become, and it has a negative effect. In 2013, let me go back a little bit. We were experiencing a lot of difficulties in service levels in the port. There were labor shortages, there were chassis shortages, there were delays due to construction at many of the terminals, and the summer was particularly bad. Back then, Rick Larrabee and I from the Port Authority came together to discuss the situation, and basically the tone of the discussion was, okay, it's 2013, we're dredging the channel to 50 feet, we're raising the Bayonne Bridge, Panama is going to be opened, and we can't even handle what we have today. So what are we going to do, and how are we going to handle that? Rick and I jointly created an organization, volunteer organization called the Task Force on Port Performance. It was pretty much the first one that had been created amongst all the major ports. The group was a volunteer of industry stakeholders, inclusive of labor organizations, the Port Authority, trucker associations, terminal operators. Labor sat on the board, chassis companies, ocean carriers, shippers, consignees, and railroads. And we sat around a table and we asked each stakeholder class, what can you do to help improve the operational situation in the port? Don't tell me what I have to do to help you. What can you do? This group came up with a list of 23 recommendations that we felt were the most important to deal with the larger ships coming in. They were broken up into tiers. We had chassis management systems, we had truck management systems, port community systems, aligning gate hours, coming up with a portal within the port, since we have 5 or 6 different terminals where you could do all your business through one. So this group came together and we put together this list of recommendations. The question was, now what do we do with it? We have recommendations, now what do we do with them? Well, we subsequently created an organization called the Council on Port Performance. And the Council on Port Performance is made up of those similar stakeholders, and really their responsibility is to promote within the port activities to achieve these 23 recommendations. And we've had a lot of successes. You know, the communication in the port is much better. Even something as simple as, you know, winter comes every year, and when the snow comes, we all get on the phone the night before and we decide how we're going to open the port. What's the best way to open it? Do you keep the trucks out? Do you let the trucks in? So the communication between all of the stakeholders has really gotten much better. And I think that's going to happen, that's got to happen, not just here, but in every port. Communication needs to improve. The supply chain is so tight that the days of the cargo coming off the ship and somebody coming to get it when they feel like it and delivering it to a warehouse when they want to those are gone. The whole supply chain needs to be highly coordinated. The ship needs to show up on time. The cargo needs to come off at a specific time. You need an appointment to show up when you get the freight. The warehouse has to be ready to take it, and the trucker has to have hours of service left in his pocket to be able to pick up your freight. The whole way of doing our business is evolving and needs to change. So I think that's sort of my message, is that it's a supply chain that needs to evolve, and we're working pretty hard with the stakeholders here to make sure it does.
Thank you, John. That's a key message. It all has to fit together, and it has to happen at the right time. And bringing bigger ships is going to just amplify some of those crisis points. Next, I'd like to turn it over to Bucky McAllister to talk about the ship assist, the equipment requirements to get these vessels in and out, and also to touch on the tug and barge industry here.
Sure. Well, efficiency is obviously the key for providing transportation services, and that's the fundamental of our whole business. Our company was founded in 1864 by my great-great-grandfather. In those days, a two-person crew would go around New York Harbor hauling literally barrels of products like kerosene for people's lighting lamps at home, and obviously we've come a very, very long way since then. The Erie Canal and the Hudson River were obviously key to development of New York Harbor. We're at the crossroads of the Atlantic Ocean and Long Island Sound, and the Port of New York geographically is going to be a transportation crossroads forever. We've been changing with technology. Trade really took off in Manhattan as a result of this maritime crossroads, and we've been trading ever since, whether it was grain, lamp oil, or bitcoins. We're still out there trading. 80% of the home heating oil in New England is still transported by water. And the American waterways are very, very vibrant for delivery of local goods when it comes to bulk liquids. We're very happy about that. There's a Coast Guard rulemaking underway about anchorages in the Hudson River, and we're hoping that there's going to be continued legislative support or regulatory support for that trade. There's been a lot of talk about the containers. I have completely lifted this bar chart off the Port Authority website. It shows a pretty steady march of increase in TEUs being delivered to New York City every single year except for 2009. One interesting thing is 2009 is when the stock market actually rebounded 25%, but that was the one year when container deliveries were down as a follow-on from the economic crisis. New York Harbor is not only one of the biggest ports in America, but it's also one of the fastest growing, and so this trend is going to continue. Meanwhile, sadly for us, the trend of the number of ship arrivals is doing the exact opposite. Back in the 1940s, New York City saw 30,000 ship calls per year, obviously part of the World War II sea lift. But it really is a slow trend of decreasing numbers of ships in New York Harbor. And for ship assist businesses, that means we need to be more efficient and get by with less work every year. The The core reason is obviously the ships are getting bigger. Here's an ACL ship, and just last year they replaced a 2,000 TEU ship with a 4,000 TEU ship. And there's also a lot of discussion of the Bayonne Bridge. Here we are assisting a 5,000 TEU ship underneath the Bayonne Bridge. The tugboat is pulling off to the left because the ship is about to go into the 110-degree turn at Bergen Point in order to get into Newark Bay. And as you can see, there's not really a lot of room between that ship and the Bayonne Bridge. So the 5,000 TEU limit is where we are today. Here's the other angle. Again, this is now a 2007 built ship. Just a handful of years ago, this was one of the biggest ships coming into New York Harbor, and things are changing rapidly. This is an image of the Port of Oakland, where one of the 18,000 TEU ships has just called. This is the Benjamin Franklin, which is a CMA ship. It's 1,200 feet long. It's essentially the same size as the Empire State Building. It goes 20 miles an hour. And at idle, it's doing about 11 knots. So it's not so easy to make tight turns. One cheerful aspect of this ship for me is that it's taking 5 tugboats to get it into the port of Alameda. I'm not sure this ship's really headed to New York. We'll see. So where does that leave us? Bigger tugs are needed. We currently have 3 tugboats under construction. These are the biggest and most technologically sophisticated tugs we've ever built in the history of our company. This tug will have nearly 7,000 horsepower. It's also going to be one of the first EPA Tier 4 vessels built, so it's going to have scrubbers with urea injection. And ironically, while that's going to reduce the particulate matter, it's going to reduce the efficiency of the engine and actually increase the amount of carbon emissions per horsepower. So it's kind of an ironic thing about the new environmental regulations. But this is going to be a much, much more powerful vessel, and obviously training personnel who are going to be able to run the sophisticated power plant on board is one of the things that keeps us up at night. Another issue that we are concerned about is salvage capacity. These new larger vessels, when, as, and if they get in trouble, are going to need much more support and more sophisticated support. So we are building firefighting systems into our tugboats. Here's an image of one of our liquid natural gas terminal tugs fighting a shoreside fire down in Maryland. And we will now have FIFI 1 class tugs in New York Harbor. This is a U.S. Department of Transportation graph that shows miles driven per year in the United States of America. Again, you see the same down dip in 2009. And obviously, we're now in 2016 seeing a very, very major upwards turn on that graph. So another one of the concerns that we have is roadside traffic. As the number of container arrivals increases, we're turning our attention to the landside infrastructure and whether that's going to be able to handle the increase in trade. So short sea shipping is a natural thing to consider. This is one of our tugs and barges, which are capable of carrying between 400 and 600 TEU. And we've had these vessels on charter periodically to terminals like Howland Hook and Global Terminal. That's the end of my presentation. Look forward to any questions. And now I'll turn it over to somebody who actually knows how to drive all this stuff.
Thank you, Bucky. That's just the point. Bob has been involved in the joint training program in preparation to evaluate how we're going to get these big ships into the port. We've dredged the channel deeper. We haven't made it any wider. It still has some fairly tight confines, so there's been some simulations going on. And Bob, tell us, are they going to be able to fit in here, and how is it going to work?
Absolutely. I'll just have less hair than I have now.
Come on, a 13-year-old can get them in, I hear.
That 13 years old was the best helmsman I ever had in my life over the 20-plus years in piloting. and she can speak English. Let me, well, I'll try not to get, with limited time, no sea stories. I'll have to go by, I hope I'll go off my wife's notes instead of mine. I wish she was here. She can see mine are too good. But as the bridge was being raised and the channels deepening, we started to handle 8,000 TEU ships, which we thought were going to be the biggest ones until the phones were ringing about the 14,000s and the 18,000s. The 14,000s are around 1,205 feet by 169-foot beam, and the 18,000s are 1,305 feet with a 189-foot beam. Big ships. When you go on these ships, you cannot see. All you see traveling the Kills inbound, you look to your right and you see New Jersey. You look to your left, you see Staten Island. What you don't see is buoys. What you don't see is water dead ahead of you. It's a new way of piloting. You're going to have to rely heavily on your computers besides your instincts. So therefore, we've done all this air draft and deepening. The channels were not widened. So we obviously had major concerns about making turns, going into Port Elizabeth, Port Jersey, no room. So we met amongst the pilots many, many hundreds and hundreds of hours to come up with a plan. I mean, you needed to have this plan because simple math says there might not be enough room. So what we did is we sat down and we discussed things, and we came up with, the size and the draft of vessels. Pilots are now conning the ship from a third away from the bow as opposed to 2/3 away from the bow. There is now, on the 14,000s, there's 790 feet behind you. On the 18,000s, there's 847 feet behind you. It's a whole other ship following right behind you, and it's attached to you. So there's a new way of piloting, and you can't turn around and look. You have to concentrate on your swings, right? You're making a swing, your beam goes from 169 feet. Your effective beam is probably around 700 feet, and the channel width is 800 feet. So what we did is we decided, let's go down to MITEX. Let's get a plan together, because we also have to think about speed and surge mitigation. You've got to pass tankers in the Kills. You can only go a certain speed. Otherwise, you'll be ripping them off the dock with the displacement. Also, you're even passing closer when you go in Port Liz Channel to Port PNCT or Monternal. You're that much closer to the ship. You're only 100 feet on each side, 150 feet on each side to the ship. So you really can't transfer more than 3 knots. So there was a number of things. The cranes have to be maybe pulled up. Crane placement, when you dock the ship, a sailor ship has to be, there's only a little bit of flat space. These ships were designed for fuel economy, to get across that they weren't designed to handle in limited area. And when you land on the docks, if you get even a 2 degree over the pier, you'll hit the crane. So the cranes have to be placed properly with docking. It's going to be communication is key between the pilots, between the longshoremen, between the guys on the crane. When you have to leave the dock, you have to leave the dock. You have to get underway on time or you can't bring it in. There's only certain times you'll be able to transit through the Kills, and you have no place to go if you come in and your ship hasn't left the dock. So what we did was we decided let's get together and put scenarios of transversing the Kills. And if you want slack water at Bergen Point, what are you going to have on the Conhook Range? You'll have max tide. But there's many, many, many obstacles that we had to overcome. So we decided we'll go to MITEX, we'll set up simulations, we'll get a bunch of pilots to go down there. We had the 3 groups. We had New York, New Jersey harbor pilots, Metro pilots, myself with Moran, and the Sandy Hook pilots. We were going down to MITEX to figure this all out, so to speak, on a paper ship and a paper ocean now, too. There's still a simulator. It's a good place to crash if you're going to crash. So as of thinking this, we decided, you know what? We called a couple of pilot groups on the West Coast, said, let's go to Long Beach, let's go to San Francisco. Let's ride the real thing. Let's go on these vessels that they're already handling. You can sit between ships, between rides, and you can talk to a group of pilots sitting around having a cup of coffee. And you can discuss the handling of these things. What are your concerns? Like in Long Beach, their concerns was the wind. In San Francisco, you went and they said, oh, their major concern was current. Well, Long Beach doesn't have any current, so they didn't have to worry about it. So, but you sit down, you get an education by sitting around a table, talking to other pilots, seeing their recommendations for handling ships. Because you have to also start thinking, and now you have to have, what winds can we do this with? What type of visibility do we have to work with? So long story short, we came back, we sat with our pilot organizations and discussed it just like we did. This is what we're hearing. This is what we do. We put those recommendations, we talked to MyTags to set up the tugs use we're going to have, to set up these size ships, the 18,000s and the 14,000s. We spent a couple of weeks down here handling these ships on the simulator to find out what can we do. We started with 60% current, 40% current, slack water, 20 knot winds, 10 knot winds, 0. Because in other ports, over knot of current, they won't handle the ships. Over 20, 25 knot winds, they won't handle the ships. When you get on these ships and you see, you can understand why. And they have more room in the other ports also to navigate as opposed to New York. So long story short, we sat down and we went to MyTags. And we did not train because the pilots familiarized themselves with this, because I think at this point, if we need training, we're in trouble. But what we did is we had the Coast Guard was there, VTS, Captain Mike Day was there, the captain of the port. We had shipping companies representative, and Port Authority Beth Ann Rooney was there. If you heard before, she was my helmsman, her daughter. Excellent. So we sat there, and for 2 weeks, all day long, we worked with these things, and we came up with some parameters, which aren't published yet, but we came up with a plan that we know is going to work. And in the next 6 months or so, we'll have every pilot to go down to MyTags and be trained, along with tugboat captains. Buckley sent, McAllister sent down a tugboat captain, Moran sent down a tugboat captain, because they have individual, you're actually working like you would in real life on these simulators. You're on a bridge wing on another floor as the tugboat captain, like he's like on another floor of the Empire State Building now, right? Talking to him, giving him his commands. So as real life as could be, we did it on the simulators down there. And we came up with parameters that will work. But again, we will start off like we always do in this harbor, because we have the best safety record in the world, with baby steps, little steps at a time to see what we can do. And let's start off with the 14,000s first as opposed to the 18,000s. Let's get used to handling them. Because when we call the ultra-large container vessels now, which we thought were going to be the biggest, we first went, my God, look at the size of these things. You know what? And then as time goes on, you get used to handling them. Now we're getting ready for the mega ships, as we'll call them now. Yeah, every pilot will go down to MyTags for a couple of days and work together with tug captains and everything else. And every pilot that's going to be on one of these vessels will be familiarized with these ships. And as far as I'm concerned, we're all looking forward to the challenges they may bring. And let's keep on going. Bring them all to New York. We're ready for them. Thank you.
Hey, folks, you've heard it from Bob. They will fit. We may have to have some strictures or operating procedures that will still be coming out as far as how the passing situations and, you know, what tides, what type of wind conditions, but we will be able to handle these ships here. Proper planning prevents poor performance. Very key point. I thank all these guys for giving their information, and we'd like to open it up if there are any questions. Well, I had one, because inevitably things go wrong. John, with the Port Performance Group, what do you forecast could be the choke point, or what could go wrong with these big ships, and how do we get around that choke point?
Well, there could be a lot of them. really, not from a vessel operating perspective, I'll leave that to the experts, but from a cargo handling perspective, you're going to have a lot of freight coming off over, a compacted period of time. I think, and what we recognize is it's not just a marine terminal issue, it's really, like I said before, a supply chain issue. So we've actually added to the Council on Port Performance the warehouse operators in New Jersey, because there may be a truck line at the marine terminal, but the truck line may be there because the warehouse isn't open to bring the freight to. So it's really difficult to say exactly where, but everybody's got to do their part. You need the labor to work the ships. The terminal needs to be open long enough to handle the freight. You need to come when you're supposed to pick up your freight. You need to have hours of service to work the truck. You need to have time on the road to get there, and you need to have the warehouse available and open to take the freight at all hours of the day, not just 8 to 5. The whole 8 to 5 mentality of our supply chain has to change completely.
A lot of factors go into this, and on top of it all, one key point about this port is we affectionately call it a multi-jurisdictional port. The international shipping business is subject to international regulations, federal regulations, New York, New Jersey, a little bit of Connecticut, the city of New York, who, by the way, has a budget bigger than the state of New Jersey, and all of the related regulatory agencies and oversight organizations, as well as all of our federal partners, the Coast Guard, OSHA, anybody that's involved. So it's a difficult thing, and the key thing in this port is cooperation. There are quite a few different organizations that work well to make sure that everybody has their voice at the table to make sure that this will work. I think on behalf of the industry, we can very confidently say the mega ships are certainly a new phenomena, but they're just a continued extension of what's been happening ever since Malcolm McLean put his 58 containers on his ship. So we're prepared for this. Any other questions? Because we're getting near the end of time. Clay?
We have time for one more question.
Back in the day, I used to go to Carteret a lot. In those days, Carteret and raw materials and chemicals coming in. Not, by the way, necessarily. Volume of cargo that probably naphtha being a good example. Working with the firefighters, not just in the NYFD, but also the various other departments that have
We don't work directly with them, but there are certain parts of even the Maritime Security that works with the fire departments, the NYPD, both police departments, and yes, they do have, they train going on a ship to fight these fires. Now,
I would say the Coast Guard has
Coast Guard
taken
is
the lead
command
on that
structure.
in New York Harbor, and the Area Maritime Security Committee has been a really great venue for that. As Captain was saying earlier, there was a 300-person meeting today at the Bayonne Cruise Terminal to prepare for the next eventuality.
Charlie?
Has been cautioning the public about the
you have the best pilot in the world on them.
Well, they're going to need you to go out and talk about that.
I think New York Shipping would be handling something like that, too. We don't go out and, unless asked to come to venues like this to discuss anything like that.
Yeah, we do that at, any industry stakeholder venues. We work closely with the Port Authority, marketing the port. It's an ongoing effort. The Port Authority has a team of people that goes from location to location, out to Chicago and New England and out to Pennsylvania. My staff joins them, and we, jointly, we sell the port on all the advances that we've been making over the past several years.
The Port Authority is also involved in stuff like that. I would address that question to Beth Ann.
Carlene, to address that a little bit, although we are probably the premier industry that actually physically touches people's lives the most every day, from the clothing they wear to the fuel in their car to the fuel that goes to the power plants to underwear, don't want to forget that, clothing, games, toys, cell phones, all international maritime trade, but we have not really done a great job in getting that out to the general public. As I said before, we've gotten so good at what we do, people don't know we do it anymore. And there have been efforts. I know New York Ship had a $12 million project a few years back, taking radio time and posters, but it's very hard to get public recognition of some of this. We don't take Super Bowl ads. We don't have spokesmodels. There are no Pro-Am golf outings. We're a very quiet industry. But, it's a tremendous value. So we're really, if the people out there can help us get a good word out, we'd appreciate it.
So,
Flannery is the water flyer for Waterfront Alliance and put that out to all of us. So stay tuned for more opportunities along those lines with Waterfront Alliance and other.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I think
Yeah, we're
we're
out
being
of
told,
time.
thank you very much, we're out of time.
Thank
If
you.
there are questions, please see us.